So what you'll see here is when you list your property, there are a number of forms that you'll need to fill out and complete. One of those is going to be called the seller's property disclosure. Now, keep in mind there are two versions of this. There's one version that pertains to pretty much any property. There's an alternative version that specifically refers to what you're disclosing about a condominium that you own. Now, as a buyer, you're definitely going to want to take a close look at this. But as a seller, you're also going to want to take your time to complete this as accurately as possible. You will often find a third option, and that is that there is a seller never occupied the property type of disclosure. There are certain things that they potentially could have disclosed, but ultimately they didn't live there, so they're basically saying that, hey, I didn't live here, so I can't tell you the day-to-day performance of the property. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that there's a series of check boxes you'll see here. And so you'll want to put the property address in here. It's important to note if it was occupied or unoccupied and when the last time somebody actually lived there. If the property is vacant, you'll want to call that out as well. You'll see that there's always a yes, a no, and an I don't know. Now, under your I don't knows, those are typically the things, the most common ones you'll see that are an I don't know. It's going to be something like the aluminum wiring, right? Like people purchase a property, they don't necessarily know what kind of wiring is in the walls. So oftentimes they'll select I don't know. If you have had any termite treatments, you'll want to call that out as well. If you maintain the property with an annual contract or a regular treatment schedule, that's always a great selling point because it means that you have taken the initiative, if there was previous damage or not, you have taken the initiative to continue to protect the property to avoid that. And typically when you're under contract with a treatment company, there will be a certain level of warranty that comes with that that will potentially include, retreatment at any time in the future if you see, bugs come, and a variety of other things. So make sure that you read through those really carefully. Additionally, you'll have a section about water intrusion. And folks like to know about this. Are there any drainage problems? Are you in a flood zone? Do you know if you are? Do you actually have a copy of an elevation certificate? So when you see a property that's listed as being in an A flood zone or B or C or D, and it's followed by the letter E, it implies that there is an existing elevation certificate. Now, whether the owner has a copy of it, you as the seller, if there's one on file, potentially, that'll be a different level of research. If one does not exist, then you can certainly have one done. There are a lot of companies out there that do them, so be sure to ask your agent or your title company for options on folks that can do these elevation certificates if one does not exist. Your next section from there is going to go into plumbing. A lot of folks like to know if they're on well water, public water, private for their drinking, but a lot of folks want to know if there is a septic tank and if there are any drain fields. That's going to be that's neither good nor bad. It's just a different approach as far as long-term maintenance and care will go. And what sort of plans the future owner has to make in terms of having that drain field, to have it drained every so often. Were there any leaks in that? Do they treat it regularly? So that you definitely want to know what your disposal system is. You'll also go into the next section, which will be about the roof. Any leaks, any problems, when was it repaired, when was it replaced. This is a great opportunity if you just put in a new roof. I know that this is a big section in terms of your home insurance. And a lot of the carriers were having challenges with the roofs not having enough life expectancy. So what you'll come across as you move forward, both as you purchase another home, if you're a seller or if you're a buyer buying your first home, you'll want to know the age of the roof just in terms of that insurance element that will eventually come up. Pretty much as long as there's a certain amount of life left on the roof, per a home inspector, they will oftentimes continue the policy. But you'll often want to make sure that that inspection is done carefully. And related to this will parallel on your what's called your 4-point home inspection, which covers the 4 main points of the property. And when they write your home insurance policy or offer to write one, you'll see that is done based on that 4-point that you will need to provide to the insurance company. You'll also want to call out anything in here as far as your pools, hot tubs, and spas. There are some questions about sinkholes, water settlage or land settling, etc. Typically, if there hasn't been a sinkhole problem, you won't even know. They do want to know if there has been an insurance claim made, though. So maybe you have had some, as a seller, you've noticed some settling and you had some remediation done, but you never actually filed a claim. So you'll want to make sure that you do call that out here, because they'll want to know about any past or present soil movement, but they'll also want to know if any claim was paid and how that shook out in the end. Additionally, you'll need to disclose if your property is in a homeowners association. This helps to better understand, if the buyer is going to qualify. Some buyers don't want to be in an HOA. There are some HOAs that are completely optional, which is, a number of notes that have to be made. But if the buyer that's buying your property has an option to join it versus a requirement, that will make a difference. A lot of the bigger things that will come up is going to be in the event that there are any encroachments. So anything that comes onto your property or that your property bleeds onto, essentially. You'll want to know in terms of any changes to the restrictions, because say you're selling your property and you're currently able to park boats in the driveway. But there are proposed amendments that may change that to make it that it's no longer allowed. Or if you have a work van that you park at home and it's got branding on the side of it, some HOAs don't allow for that. And if there are restrictions coming into place that would not allow that, and your buyer wants that, then they'll also need to be made aware of that. Additionally, any proposed legal or administrative action that is potentially being brought up around the homeowners association, road maintenance, etc. The big one here is going to be under the environmental, and that's going to be a question about the lead-based paint. So if your property was built prior to 1978 in Florida, we are required to have a lead-based paint disclosure. That will be a separate document, and that will be an addendum that will have to accompany the final purchase agreement. If you are aware of anything, in anywhere on this form, if there are any things that you are aware of that you don't disclose, that could potentially lead to some challenges down the line as a seller, because if you are aware of any material defects in the property or the title or anything like that, but you don't disclose it, then there are some potential challenges and issues that could come up down the line. It is always recommended to err on the side of caution. Tell what you know, and if you don't know, say I don't know. But definitely be, full transparency when it comes to these disclosure forms when you're transferring the ownership of the property. And then additionally, you'll have this section here, which is on the government claims and litigation. So it's always a question of, what am I buying? And that's what I like to view this form with my sellers as being. It's kind of the full disclosure. What am I buying? Let the buyer know what they're getting into. By being fully honest from the beginning and disclosing what needs to be shared, you are inevitably not only providing that transparency to a buyer, but you are also protecting yourself a little bit here in terms of it potentially will come out later. If there are problems, you can assume that they're going to come out later. There will be a full search on the property itself by the by your title agent. There will be inspections performed by, home inspectors on behalf of the buyers. So there are a number of opportunities for the truth to be revealed, and not disclosing it doesn't help matters any. It could potentially lead to either legal issues down the line, or it could be a matter that you end up not disclosing these things. You go under contract and the buyer finds out about them and cancels the contract. And if they're, if they're concerned, then that could be another question from the buyer as well. So this will be, again, this section is all about your governmental situation, claims, litigation, what you know of in terms of, have you ever filed claim against your home insurance policy? That's something that stays with the property as well, in terms of the history of the property. So that could impact the next person, it could impact your buyer, their ability to obtain affordable insurance, or it could be something that could just, change their rate, or whether it could be something that you filed that was no big deal. So, but keep in mind, there's always a record and there's always a transaction history on those things. Any sort of issues with zoning, property improvements that were done without the necessary permits, that would fall into unpermitted work. Are there any open permits on the property? Those will need to be closed before transferring the title. Or transferring the deed. So the deed on the property is going to have a full research trail, as I mentioned. What that includes is taking a look at, are there any mechanics liens on there? Is there anything that's got work done that's outstanding? And then the next section is going to be your Foreign Investment in Real Estate Property Tax Act. So this is basically a disclosure. If you as the seller are a foreign national, and you do not have any sort of means by which to have taxes withheld from this transaction, then there's going to be a series of things that the buyer will have to address, and potentially withhold that on your behalf. So there are some implications under that. Everything is totally workable. It's certainly not something that, screeches the brakes on anything. The biggest, most common one is when a foreign seller is selling a property that's their second home or an investment property, and it's being purchased by somebody who is going to, it's like a waiver or a attestation that basically says, hey, I agree that I'm going to be living in this property as my primary residence for at least X number of months out of the year for such amount of time. Usually it's 2 years. So by saying that, that will oftentimes negate the need for the FERPTA disclosure. And there's just a series of documents that would have to go along with it. So you'll want to disclose whether you are or are not a foreign national, and if you are subject to additional withholding, etc. And then the last part would be if there's anything else, kind of a big open blank space of if there is anything else that would be shown off in the form of an addendum or a supplement, that would be where that would go. So if there's anything else that needs to be disclosed that has not been outlined throughout this document, or any additional information that needs to be provided, that would be where that would go. And then of course we would go ahead and have this signed by you, the seller, and print your name, and then you'd put in your date here. And then additionally, to complete the document, once the buyer has received a copy of this, the buyer will then sign off, and they will say that they have read it, understood it, and received a copy of it. Now, they may not agree with it. They may not want to accept what's in there, but they are going to say that, yes, I've read it. Yeah, I get it. And I got a copy of it. So that would be, in a nutshell, your seller's property disclosure.